Today, I want to begin by talking about the ending of your novel, and about how the ending of your novel really begins with the beginning of your novel. And in order to begin understanding how to craft a great ending, you need to understand that writing a good ending doesn't end with the ending itself, it actually begins with writing a good beginning. Confused? Hopefully by the end of this video you won't be. Anyway, let's begin. If I asked you where the ending of your novel begins, you might say something like 2 or 3 chapters before the end, or 75% of the way through, or at the beginning of Act 3 if you're still a member of the 3-act cult who hasn't escaped from their compound yet. But what if I told you that your ending actually begins on page 1? You'd probably say, boy, Carl, you've finally snapped, haven't you? This is more of a mindset than anything else, but I think that the importance of laying the groundwork for your ending as early as possible is something that is often overlooked and really shouldn't be. I'm a strong believer that there are no bad endings to a story, just endings that aren't set up correctly at the beginning. That if you have a bad ending, it's not necessarily because the ending is bad, it's because it is paired with a not good beginning, a beginning that doesn't fit that ending. Writers spend a lot of time talking about promises in a story and foreshadowing and Chekhov's guns and all the other stuff that goes into setting up and paying off a good ending. All the stuff you need to do before your ending in order to make the ending work. But even with all of that, it could be argued that most writers, myself included, don't give this issue as much thought as it deserves. We do not craft our beginnings with the ending in mind. Now, different writers, depending on your process, approach endings in different ways. Some writers start with the ending and work backwards. This is probably more common among outliners and plotters. In this case, you are really trying to craft a beginning that matches an ending that you have in mind. You are following the chain of causality in the backwards direction to find a place where you can start and end up where you want to end up. These writers know where they want to end up, but not necessarily the best way to get there. That's usually what they discover through the outlining process. The biggest challenge here, I think, is ending up with a story that feels too contrived. If all the coincidences in your plot, if all the events, the happenstance, all the things that just happen to happen throughout the plot feel too much like they're just meant to make a specific ending happen, then that's not good. That leads to a very contrived, maybe too predictable of a story. Other writers start with the start and see where the story takes them. These are your classic discovery writers or pantsers. For them, it's about letting a beginning play out and the story ending up wherever it ends up. They go in whatever direction that they feel is the best, most interesting to take the story in. These writers try to craft an ending that matches their beginning. It could be argued that this is more of a natural process, as the ending they come up with is derived directly out of the line of causation from the beginning, but I don't think that's categorically true. I think that somebody working from the end to the beginning can also come up with a very natural story. It's just different methods to arrive at the same thing. In the case of writers who start with a beginning without knowing where the ending is, the problems tend to creep in when they can't find a good ending, when you write yourself into a corner, or when a promising or very intriguing beginning actually ends up running out of steam and is not as interesting as you thought it was, or not interesting or having enough depth to actually make a full novel-length story. Stephen King, who is arguably the most famous pantser of our time, has been criticized for having some endings that just sort of fizzle out, and this is a potential problem that can happen when you start out not knowing where you're going. As I mentioned, a good ending depends so much on what you do in the beginning, and you won't necessarily know what to do in the beginning if you don't know what your ending is. All that being said, both approaches work, and whether you start with the ending or start with the beginning, setting up things in your beginning to set up your ending is still important. No matter what approach you take, most of the problems that happen with endings crop up when an ending doesn't match the beginning, or when a beginning doesn't set up what needs to be set up for the ending to properly pay off. I said this at the beginning, but I don't think there's a such thing as a bad ending. So long as you pair that ending with the correct beginning, even something that's outlandish or tragic or seemingly unsatisfying can work, provided it is set up correctly in the beginning. There's a lot of narrative elements that go into this: tone, mood, foreshadowing. You have to think about world building. You have to think about characterization, the skills and temperament and behaviors and attitudes of your character. All of these things go into establishing the rules and the expectations that the reader is going to have in the beginning of your story that will hopefully play off at the ending. You can imagine if Hamlet started out as a lighthearted buddy comedy filled with all sorts of wacky hijinks and then suddenly ended, well, the way that Hamlet ends. One of the most important elements of the classic tragedy is that the reader knows and understands that the story is a tragedy, but the characters participating in the story don't necessarily realize it. There is this dramatic irony in a tragedy because the reader knows that the characters are doomed, but the characters usually don't. The tragic ending of a tragedy only works when the proper groundwork is laid at the beginning of the story. Romeo and Juliet literally does this in like the second line of the play or whatever. 2 Shakespeare references in one video. That's right, I'm taking my high school level knowledge of the classics and trying to make this channel more highbrow. This issue doesn't just apply to the tone of the ending, it also applies to the resources and abilities that characters have to solve the main problems of the story, which usually happens towards the end. If you solve a plot problem late in a story with a hitherto unintroduced story element, that's an example of an ending being hurt by something that doesn't happen in the beginning. Completely unpredictable or completely unexpected endings sound like a good thing, but they really aren't. Your ending needs to fit together based on the rules and expectations that you've established throughout the story. Readers, whether they realize it or not, will be expecting certain things, and if something completely unexpected happens, they may not be happy. That doesn't mean that the reader will know what the ending is or that the story will be so predictable that they'll see it coming from a mile away. But when the ending does happen, the reader should be able to see how all of the things they've learned and all the things that have been established throughout the story fit together to make that ending predictable. There's a saying in screenwriting that the ending should be surprising yet inevitable. It should be unexpected, but should make logical sense after the reader sees the ending based on everything that's built up through the story. This is really the best way to craft a great ending, and it requires doing things in the beginning and arguably the middle of the story in order to do this. There's a moment towards the end of the first Mistborn book where the main character uses a power that was never really introduced before that point in the story. That's a problematic ending. In the case of Mistborn, I think it's a relatively minor problem because of how the moment actually plays out, and I think its main purpose is to set up stuff later in the book. But this is an example of the sort of thing that can become a problem. Mystery writers deal with this all the time. You never want the solution to a mystery to be something that requires knowing information that was not introduced at some point in the story. A proper mystery should be solvable based on all the things that are established, all of the clues and evidence that you give the reader throughout the story. Ultimately, if the main conflict is solved using a means or method that has not been established earlier on in the plot, then the reader is going to feel cheated. They will feel like the ending was contrived to get the characters out of an impossible situation. What will work in your ending depends entirely on what you do in the beginning of your story. Fixing an ending that doesn't work could involve changing the ending, but it could also involve changing the beginning of the story. You can get away with all kinds of stuff in your ending, provided you establish it correctly earlier on in the story. So it could be said then that writing a good ending means writing the right beginning. Speaking of ending things, we're at the end of this video. So there you have it. I'd love to hear what you think about this in the comments down below. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.